everyone, I'm Timothea.
I'm Ethan.
And I'm Shiren.
And we are from
1029. Today, we are going to tell you some stuff that's cooler than Singapore's property market. In our project, our group seeks to find out more on Singapore's policies implemented within the last 2 years, from 2009 to 2010, and how they have impacted housing. To give you a clearer picture, I shall quote you a few statistics on Singapore's current housing situation. Singapore is a small open economy with limited resources. With a current land size of 710 square kilometers, a population size of 5.08 million people, Singapore is the world's third densest city with a population density of 7,022 people per square kilometer. Hence, this is a significant problem that the Singapore government needs to solve, and this explains the rationale of our project. Over the years, prices of housing has been increasing due to increasing demand. However, the prices cannot continue to rise or it will be unattainable to the masses. These are the demand-side policies implemented by the government to control prices of housing in Singapore. We have loan to value, otherwise known as LTV, the minimum cash payment, seller's stamp duty, minimum occupation period, and the resale levy. And each policy will be discussed over the next few minutes.
Now I will talk to you about the first policy, the loan to value limit for housing loans. Loan to value is the ratio between the loan amount and the value of the property. In this case, apartments for residential living in Singapore. Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, regulates the LTV limit for housing loans granted by financial institutions. As of 30th August 2010, this limit has been lowered from 80% to 70%, applicable to those who already have outstanding housing loans when applying for a housing loan for the new property purchased. However, for borrowers who do not have any outstanding housing loans, they continue to have an LTV cap of 80%. For HDB buyers, loans granted will still have an LTV cap of 90%. HDB loans are offered to eligible first-time flat buyers and second-timers who are expanding their flats to meet their housing needs. They must use all their CPF ordinary account balance before HDB loans will be granted. Furthermore, for those taking a second concessionary HDB loan, they must use their CPF refund and 50% of the cash proceeds from the sale of their previous flat before they are granted a HDB loan. These rules apply to housing loans for all private residential properties, executive condominiums, HUDC flats, and HDB flats. Implications. After the changes in the housing policy, consumers will need a sizable amount of money to purchase more than one house since the LTV limit has fallen. Therefore, consumers will be deterred from purchasing houses for investment purposes. This is because the amount of loan they can obtain has been reduced, and hence they need to be wealthier in order to fork out such high capital property investment. In the long run, this policy will drive demand from consumers who purchase houses for speculative purposes down.
For the second policies, we have the minimum cash payment. Since 30th August 2010, minimum cash payment is increased from 5% to 10% of the valuation limit. This only affects buyers of certain housing types who are taking housing loans from financial institutions regulated by MAS. They must already have one or more outstanding housing loans when applying for a housing loan for the new property purchase. The housing types affected include private residential properties, executive condominiums, HUDC flats, and HDB flats, including those under DBSS flats. The changes in this policy will discourage buyers with existing housing loans to purchase another apartment, either for speculative or accommodation purposes. Investors in housing properties need to be wealthier in terms of cash available on hand. Without at least 10% of the valuation limit of the new property, they will be unable to purchase the property. This decreases demand for buyers who intend to purchase an apartment for speculative purposes but do not have enough cash with the increased minimum cash payment. As a result, demand for housing will be driven downwards. For the third policies, we have the seller's stamp duty. Seller's stamp duty is a levy implemented on those selling residential properties within a certain period of time. Originally 1 year, the time frame has been increased to 3 years as of 30th August 2010. The SSD will be levied on residential properties based on the number of years the property is held before being sold off. For properties sold within the first year of purchase, which means to say the property is held for 1 year or less from its purchase date, the full SSD rate will be imposed. For example, for the first $180,000 of the property, 1% of the full SSD rate will be imposed. For the next $180,000, 2% of the SSD rate will be imposed. Lastly, 3% of the rate will be imposed for the balance. For property sold within the second year of purchase, which means to say the property is held for more than 1 year and up to 2 years, 2/3 of the full SSD rate will be imposed. For property sold within the third year of purchase, which means to say the property is held for more than 2 years and up to 3 years, 1/3 of the full SSD rate will be imposed. No seller stamp duty rate will be payable by the vendor if the property is sold more than 3 years after it was bought. The levy will reduce the profits from the resale of apartments sold within 3 years of purchase. This acts as an disincentive to buyers who purchase flats for speculative purposes, because in order to avoid the levy fees, the time taken for turnover is very long. Hence, such investment will be less attractive to them. Therefore, demand for housing from this group of consumers will drop.
For the fourth policy, we have the minimum occupation period depending on flat type. All HDB flat owners have to meet the minimum occupation period (MOP) before they are allowed to sell their flats in the open market. In the open market, buyers and sellers are allowed to transact at a mutually agreed resale price. Owners must physically occupy their flats for a certain minimum period of time, and the time period will depend on the purchase mode and the flat type. For one room and HUDC flat, there is no occupation period needed for owners. For flats bought from HDB, DBSS flat bought from developer, and resale flat under CPF Housing Grant Scheme, a minimum of 5 years occupation period is needed from effective date of purchase. Flats bought under Selective En Bloc Redevelopment Scheme (SERS), there is also a minimum of 5 years occupation period needed from the effective date of purchase of the replacement flat. Finally, for Selective En Bloc Redevelopment Scheme replacement flat not purchased with portable SERS rehousing benefits, a minimum of 7 years occupation period is needed from the date of selection of the replacement flat, provided they had taken possession of the replacement flat, or a 5 years minimum occupation period is needed from the effective date of purchase of the replacement flat. In Implications. Consumers, including owners of resale flats who intend to invest in housing properties through reselling their houses immediately after purchase, will be unable to do so due to the restrictions of this policy. In the short run, rise in demand for new houses will slow down.
The fifth policy, resale levy. Each eligible family of Singapore citizens can purchase up to a maximum of 2 subsidized flats, enjoying 2 housing subsidies. The resale levy is made to reduce the subsidy on the second subsidized flat, hence making buyers pay more for their second new flat. The levy is at a fixed amount of between $15,000 and $50,000, depending on the flat type of the flat owner's first subsidized flat. For the first subsidized flat, the resale levy for 2 rooms will be $15,000. For 3 rooms, it will be $30,000, and for 4 rooms, it will be $40,000, and for 5 rooms, it will be $45,000, and finally, for the E-flat, it will be $50,000. Regardless of the applicability of revised or previous resale levy policy, single citizens like me, who have purchased resale flats with the lower CTF housing grant for singles, need to pay only half, the levy amount when they subsequently form a family and buy or take over the ownership of a second subsidized flat. Implications. By imposing a levy on buying a second resale flat, the amount of subsidies flat owners receive from the resale of their first flat will fall. This becomes a disincentive to purchase a new flat and subsequently resell it for cash, since the relatively low compared to before the implementing of the new policy. Hence, demand for housing for profit-making purposes will fall.
Evaluation of policies. The ultimate aim of the changes in the aforementioned policies is to drive down the increasing housing price by reducing the demand for housing in Singapore. It reduces housing demand by imposing tighter restrictions on consumers who purchase housing properties for speculative purposes. By demand-supply analysis, when demand for housing drops, with supply held constant, price of housing properties will fall as shown. Hence, the changes in these policies will benefit the general public, as housing prices will become more affordable to them in the future. Furthermore, a reduced demand will mean that supply will be able to cope with the demand from the general public better. This goes to say, accommodation will be more readily available to them. However, as quantity traded also drops, producers will also be affected by the changes in these policies. When quantity traded and price of housing drop, revenue of producers is also reduced. As a result, profits from development of housing properties will decrease. In addition, when supply is able to cope with demand better, the consumers are more likely to enjoy housing of better quality. When supply struggles to meet demand, there will be the tendency that hasty producers will try to increase supply and result in lower quality housing. Hence, when supply is able to cope with demand, it will be more likely that quality is prioritized over quantity of housing. Here is another point to add for the effects of lower LTV limits. For housing agents, they may find it more difficult to sell houses when the LTV limit is lowered, since availability of credit has fallen.